Welcome, guys. This is Motivate Otis, and my name is Tongai Chichaya. I'm a senior lecturer in occupational therapy, and we are starting a new series where we are inviting OT thinkers and leaders in our profession. And I'm very privileged and honored today to be hosting Dr. Jennifer Crick. Jennifer Crick really doesn't require any introduction because she is well known across the OT world. Dr. Crick has written so many books. And if you guys are OT students or OTs, if you look on your bookshelf, you might have a book or books titled Occupational Therapy and Mental Health by Jennifer Crick, or Crick's Occupational Therapy and Mental Health. This is the Crick that we're going to be discussing with today. She is a leader, like I said, in our profession, a leader par excellence. Jennifer, what a privilege. Thank you so much for making time to join me in this discussion as we are going to be discussing an interesting topic, working on the margins. But before we move on to today's topic, I'll invite you, Jennifer, to introduce yourself in your own words. Personally, I like narratives, occupational narratives. So I'm going to invite you to introduce yourself and then talk briefly about your OT journey. I know it's very long, but just briefly, please.
Thank you, Tongai. It was very good of you to invite me. I enjoy talking with you.
Thank you
so I left school at the age of 16. My family were not university educated, and they didn't expect me to go to university. So I didn't have the option of a university education. But in the 1960s, occupational therapy was a diploma program. And even without A-levels, I was accepted at the London School of Occupational Therapy, which in those days was a private school run by the two women who founded it.
Wow.
So I qualified in 1970. And very quickly went into the field of mental health, where I stayed for most of my career. But as services changed in the UK and as managerialism gained momentum, I found that I couldn't practice in the way that I wanted to. So eventually I went freelance, and the last 10 years of my working life I spent as a freelance practitioner, working mostly in mental health promotion and community development. And since retiring, I've done a lot of traveling and worked with occupational therapists around the world who are working with refugees, working in disaster preparedness and response. So I'm fascinated by the concept of margins and occupational therapists working in these marginal areas.
Thank you so much for that. So now let's move on to today's topic, working on the margins. What do we mean by this? What is this all about?
If you look at the social world, it's characterized by groups of people who are either privileged or marginalized. So the margins are not one place, they're not one physical space. They exist throughout society. There are different margins, there are different ways of being marginalized, and also they're fluid. So people who are marginalized can move to the center and gain power. When I talk about the center, I'm talking about power, privilege, resources, authority. And when I talk about the margins, I'm talking about the lack of those things.
Right, I see. So now when we are taking now the perspective of practicing occupational therapy on the margins, what exactly are we doing? Who are our service users, or who are the people that we work with?
I think most of the people we work with are marginalised in some way. But then I would say that because my field is mental health, and people who have mental health problems or learning disabilities, which is my second area of interest, they are marginalised. They are relatively powerless. People who use mental health services in the UK have no say in how those services are provided or what the services consist of. They're expected to be grateful for whatever treatment they're offered, and that's little enough, but certainly they have no power to determine what those services are. So I think that occupational therapists, we started on the margins. I think a lot of OTs aren't aware of that, but the profession itself came out of social movements, working with poor people, with refugees, people with mental illness. That was the start of the profession. The first occupational therapists were social activists. And I think it's rather sad that we've largely forgotten that. In the UK, certainly in many other countries, occupational therapists are still at the forefront of social activism. When you look at countries in South America or countries in Southern Africa, the occupational therapists there really understand our role on the margins with people who are impoverished, powerless, underprivileged. You can tell I'm passionate about this. I get very excited talking about it.
Definitely, and that's very true. Like, I mean, for me, having worked in Zimbabwe, having worked in Namibia, that's really that's true. But now, somebody might be listening and saying, "Look, Jennifer, what you're saying is all good, but look, the way we are working, the jobs that are available are actually in the statutory services. Now, I have this passion to work on the margins. How can I manage to do it, to achieve this? Is it possible for people who are working in mainstream services like health systems and social services to be able to actually address these issues?"
Oh, yes, yes. I'm not saying it's easy, but if you're interested in working on the margins, you will find the margins. In fact, the margins will find you if you open your eyes. So some occupational therapists perceive the margins within the services where they're working, and they try to address them. A good example of this is Keir Harding, who is passionate about working with people who are diagnosed as having personality disorders.
Right.
And he's currently addressing how the services marginalise them further, and he's trying to do something about it. So that is seeking the margins within the mainstream. That's what he's doing.
Right.
I did a lecture tour in America a few years ago with a friend, Kit Sinclair, and we asked if they would show us any work that was going on the margins in the US. So we had the opportunity to visit a lot of occupational therapists who were doing this work, and they found different ways to do it, because in the US, your health insurance goes with your job. So it's not easy just to go freelance as you could in this country. And we found that some occupational therapists were negotiating with their employers to be allowed to do a certain amount of marginal work. Particularly in the universities, lecturers were going out and doing work with marginalised groups. For example, we went out with one occupational therapist who was working with women who've been trafficked for sex and who were being rehabilitated in this centre, and the OT was going in and working with the staff in the centre as part of her job.
Right.
Other occupational therapists managed to create jobs for themselves. So one occupational therapist we met had established a post in prison. In a prison, she got the funding to start a project, and when it was successful, she was able to introduce another project that paid for an occupational therapist to be employed in the project. So there's lots of different ways of doing it. Some occupational therapists in the UK have set up social enterprises or charities because they've observed a need on the margins, and they've looked for a way to meet that need, and they've found funding.
Wow, wow. Thank you so much for those insights. Now, my next question is, what are your views about the future of the occupational therapy profession? I know you might address more on the mental health aspect, but just your general view about the profession, the future direction. Where do you think the profession needs to be heading towards?
Many years ago, when I was doing my first research degree, my supervisor, who was a nurse, observed that occupational therapy has never really split into different professions the way that nursing has, for example. You've got nurses, you've got mental health nurses, and so on. And I think that there's a real possibility that the occupational therapy profession will split, but not, as you might think, between hospital and social services work, not between mental health and physical, but between mainstream and margins.
Wow.
Because there are increasing numbers of occupational therapists who feel like I did all those years ago, that they can't fulfill their professional purpose working within institutions where the services are designed to meet institutional goals. They're designed to meet managerial goals. And we're not the only profession that finds it hard to have a professional role within mainstream services. So I think some OTs will continue to work in mainstream services, but increasing numbers are looking for alternative ways of working.
Wow, wow, wow. Thank you so much for that. I wouldn't want to end this discussion without discussing a little bit about Crick's occupational therapy process. You know, I first learned about Crick's OT process, I think it was in the year 2000. That's when I was in my first year as an OT student at the University of Zimbabwe. And now, when I look at the literature, I still see Crick's OT process featuring. And I'm very privileged. It's actually fascinating that I'm talking to Crick now. So how did you come about this OT process, and how do you see this process in contemporary OT practice?
It's got a long history. It was 1984 when Churchill Livingston, the Edinburgh-based publisher, first wrote to me and asked if I would be interested in editing a major textbook on occupational therapy and mental health. Annie Turner's book, OT for Physical Conditions, had been very successful. So the publisher saw an opportunity to do a companion book, OT and Mental Health. And at that time, of course, OTs were not using models. We used a process. So it was inevitable that when I started writing in 1985, I would include the occupational therapy process. So I did a literature search, and in those days, there wasn't a lot of occupational therapy literature. So I looked at all the occupational therapy processes. There was Fiddler and Fiddler, who used a psychodynamic process. There was Anne Crony Mosey, the great occupational therapy theorist. And I looked at whatever was available, and I brought them together. I synthesized what other people had written about the OT process and came up with the one in the first edition of Occupational Therapy and Mental Health. And it's evolved slightly over the years. I think the problem with the process in the book is it looks linear. Right. And of course, it isn't linear. It's a complex process. It's iterative. We don't do one thing and then do the next thing. We do several things at once, and we don't do them in a particular order. So I think it can be quite misleading to look at the OT process in the book. But once you're an experienced practitioner, you understand that it's only a rough guide to what occupational therapists do. It's not a process that has to be followed step by step.
Okay. Thank you so much for clarifying that. That's very helpful. I'm sure our audience will really find that very helpful. Okay, so as we are getting to concluding this discussion, I know, I mean, behind the stage, you told me that the 6th edition of the Occupational Therapy and Mental Health book is about to come out.
Yes.
Any nuggets or a teaser of what to expect from the book?
Well, I think you can be quite excited because Wendy Bryant and John Fieldhouse were co-editors on the 5th edition, and for the 6th edition they've taken on a South African co-editor, Nicola Plasto.
Wow.
And I think because this is the second time they've done the book, they've made some really big changes. They've really taken ownership of it and completely revamped some of the ways of thinking about occupational therapy, how we understand what occupational therapy is and what it's about. So I'm very happy with it.
Wow. I can't wait to have my own copy and read it from cover to cover. Thank you so much, Jennifer. This has now brought us to the end of this discussion. So there we go, guys. We've been talking to Jennifer Creek, talking about working on the margins as occupational therapists, and there are some very valuable insights, as you might have already heard. So if you like what we're doing here, subscribe to the channel, share the videos with other people who might be interested. This channel is all about positive vibes in occupational therapy, inspiring occupational therapy students, inspiring occupational therapists, inspiring people who use our services. So please continue to give us comments, what you like, what you're enjoying, and we'll still get back in touch with you and bring the content that you would like. So this was the very first session for the series of OT Thinkers, and I'm very pleased that we had our first session with Jennifer Creek. Thank you so much, guys, and thank you so much, Jennifer.
Thank you.
Okay, guys, bye for now.